Welcome to Season 5 of Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Joshua Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement and a former health commissioner here in Baltimore, Maryland. Our goal with this podcast is to bring scientific evidence and experience to shed light on critical health issues. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith Rogers, producer of Public Health on Call. Today, guest host Andrea McDaniels talks with Professor Keisha Pollack Porter of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health about Biden's infrastructure plan and its potential impacts on generations of biased policies that underpin systemic racism. Let's listen.
I'm Andrea McDaniels, Director of Communications with the Bloomberg American Health Initiative. Today, I'm here with Keisha M. Pollack Porter, who holds many hats at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. She's a core faculty member of the initiative, a Bloomberg Centennial Professor, and Vice Dean for Faculty. She is also a leader in advancing equitable health policies. We're going to talk to her today about President Biden's $1 trillion plan to rebuild America's infrastructure, and if it will repair the impact of generations of biased policies that hurt Black and disadvantaged communities. Welcome, Keisha.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Happy to be here.
So I thought we'd start by laying out the historical background for people. How have past infrastructure policies impacted disadvantaged and minority communities?
Yeah, so I think we can look back to as early as the 1950s and think about how planners of our interstate highway systems routed some highways in this country directly and sometimes purposefully through Black and Brown communities. And in some instances, we know the government took homes by eminent domain. And just the impact of this has, I believe, left deep psychological scars and trauma on neighborhoods that lost homes, that lost schools, that lost connection to community. And so we know that transportation policy and investment has affected the development of Black and Brown communities. And, you know, there's a hope that what we will soon see come forward from the infrastructure bill will rectify these historical inequities, but it's going to be a challenge.
And, you know, the Biden administration has said that they do want to fix these inequities. But right away, we heard from groups that pointed out, you know, there were flaws in the law. You know, they're questioning, you know, whether how much it can fix. What weaknesses do you see in the law in ensuring inequity?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of potential. Let me just say, really exciting when this bipartisan infrastructural law was signed, and really excited for the tremendous opportunity for communities of color. Now, the big question that everybody has is implementation, right? How will that money be distributed? And will it be distributed in a way that addresses the racial inequities that are built into our transportation system and our infrastructure? And that's the question. And so I think without a clear answer there, I think that's why there's a lot of criticism.
And what weaknesses are there? Why is there this criticism? I guess one thing people have said is that, you know, the states will make, you know, a lot of decisions on who gets the funding. Are there other things that you see that might concern people? Yeah,
of course, right? So when we look at when we look at the federal law, right? And so we know that the way the language is, it's not very specific because of federalism, right? We leave a lot to the states, and states will then distribute the dollars to communities. And so I think there's a question about, well, if you have states that contributed to these inequities, can we trust states to make decisions to right those wrongs where communities that have been marginalized will now be prioritized for funding? And I think that's a real question. Now, I think what we're seeing is people naming this as a problem. We see people advocating for resources to get to communities that have not been prioritized for investments. And I think by holding our leaders accountable, that will be a way that we can see some more equitable investments.
And outside of holding leaders accountable, are there things that the Biden administration could be doing to get around these inequities as the plan moves forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think naming specific dollars and investments, and I don't want to say earmarks, but like really designating dollars for, a certain percentage of dollars have to go to X communities, right? Or communities of color or communities that have been historically marginalized, whatever it is. I think that there are ways to pass regulations to say that as the dollars are flowing from the federal government to communities, that the dollars have to be allocated in a way that gets to those communities that have not been prioritized for investments. So I think that that's one way. The other way is, importantly, naming historical trauma and the structural racism that has gotten us to this place where this is even an issue. And I think recognizing the importance of inequities in our transportation system, the important role of transportation policy, I think all of that's critical. So we have to name it. We have to be committed to dismantling it. And then I do think we can try to guide those resources where they need to go, particularly to communities of color.
And you talked about the 1960s when this all started, but we're still seeing some of this in communities today. There's some communities in Louisiana where we're displacing people to build a highway. And the Transportation Department actually invoked the Civil Rights Act to halt a highway project in Houston because there was concern about it going through a neighborhood. But when it comes to the reality of the situation, can the federal government step in on every incident? And is that one of the weaknesses that we could see, that they're not going to be able to catch every project?
Yeah, that's a really important question, right? So I think we can't rely on the federal government to, as you said, intervene in every single construction project where there continues to be major highways cutting through neighborhoods, forcing many residents to move. I think that is really sort of putting a Band-Aid on an issue that requires a lot more assistance. And I think we have to be proactive, right? So I think that there are ways for us to think intentionally about, well, how do we move forward with equitable investments before shovels get into the ground, right? So there are tools, for example, like racial equity impact assessments, where you can do an assessment of how those infrastructure dollars are going to impact communities and how will it exacerbate or mitigate racial inequities, right? So I think if we use tools like that actually to guide implementation, we can proactively ensure that the dollars are being invested in ways that are not going to exacerbate racial inequities. So that's just another concrete example of what we can do. And if we're doing that proactively, then we won't have to rely on the federal government to come in to invoke the Civil Rights Act in order to rectify these wrongs.
And then early in his administration, Biden signed into executive order the Justice 40 initiative, to commit 40% of investments into clean energy, clean water, and other investments into disadvantaged communities. Do you think that will help ensure equity as well, or can be used as a tool to ensure equity with the infrastructure projects?
I think there's a lot of potential. I was really excited when the current administration named the importance of addressing racism, named the importance of ensuring investments are going to communities of color. But again, it comes down to implementation, right? How are those dollars actually being passed through and being shared with communities? And do communities have voices and a stake at the table and to really guide how those dollars are getting into the community? That's another, I think, strategy that needs to be a part of any process or any strategy to address racial inequities. So I do think that the federal government has put forward some guardrails, for example, if I can use that term, to really sort of say how we should move things forward. And I do think that it's going to really matter how those dollars are being implemented. Are we holding people accountable? And where's the community in all this? Are we engaging authentically with community members to really talk about how are dollars getting to their communities? How can dollars help to support development without displacement? Because that's what's critical here.
And who should be engaging those communities? How do we get those communities engaged?
Yeah, we need trusted leaders from the communities. I mean, I think we're seeing that even now with COVID. I think there's lots of parallels, right? We can't have academics or people who are seen as not having be trusted leaders in communities sort of come in and say to do things. Like we have to partner with leaders in communities, really get down to the local level, grassroots organizing, and really create space where we are sharing power, sharing decision-making with community members to be able to talk about how should investments move forward. It's a different way of thinking about or sort of moving forward with decision-making than we typically see, but it is the way that I think is critical to help ensure that we reach the equity goals.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're seeing more of that in general in public health as we try to promote equity.
Absolutely. And it's, I think we can draw really important lessons from public health for these other sectors. You know, I think certainly transportation planners have engaged communities throughout the years, throughout decades. And there are some examples where that has not been done well and some examples where that has been done well. I think we've learned a lot in public health, particularly during the current pandemic. And I think that there are important lessons that can be lifted up for other sectors and other disciplines who have a stake in this conversation.
And do you think there are particular areas of the country that, you know, people have to pay attention to as infrastructure bill is implemented?
Absolutely. So certainly there's a lot of energy and a lot of focus on urban areas, right? And so I think it is important to also look and see what's happening in our rural communities, which on the grand scheme of things, our rural areas tend to receive fewer dollars than our urban areas. So I think looking at rural areas where communities of color are very prevalent, but certainly across the US makes a lot of sense. But I want to put some emphasis on our rural communities in this country as well.
You know, we're talking about making sure the inequities are addressed, you know, that people are pointing out flaws, but this is also, you know, an historic bill that could have a lot of impact. You know, if it's done right, how do you think communities could be impacted? What could be the result for communities?
Yeah, I think that there's some potential, right? If we do this right, if we connect communities to resources, if we ensure that we are not displacing people, if we ensure that we are not dividing towns that are so rich in history, I think that we can help communities thrive, right? And I think that's what this is about when we look at these dollars. It's engaging with communities, making sure that they are helping to direct the dollars to where the needs are, and directing these investments in a way that supports the ability of communities to thrive. And I think if we can get there, we will be able to realize and achieve health equity, which is really assuring the conditions by which every single person can be as healthy as possible. And I believe that is possible. And I think that there's a lot of potential for this bill to help us get there.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, the connection with health and infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about, some of you or people listening may be familiar with the term social determinants of health or social drivers of health. And we think about the fact that housing, transportation, education, where you grew up, your zip code, all of these things matter for health. So as we look at the infrastructure law, I keep calling it a bill. I keep thinking about before it was turned into a law, because it was a long time coming.
It was.
The infrastructure law that is in place, the bipartisan infrastructure law, it does a lot there in terms of access to clean water for certain communities, getting broadband access to certain communities, increasing investments in public transit. These are all aspects of our society that can contribute to a person either thriving or not being as healthy as possible. So that's where there's so much potential in terms of this law, and really why we need to focus on implementation. Because there is the concern that the communities that have benefited for so long will just continue to get investments, and the ones that have been left behind for so long will continue to be left behind. And so if we go ahead and we invest in making sure that any improvements to highways or roads are not only centering cars, but are also ensuring that people can walk and bike safely, that these highways are not just cutting through neighborhoods, but they are designed in a way that helps neighborhoods thrive and have access to resources. If we ensure that broadband is implemented in a way that communities that haven't had access to internet can get access. I believe that all of these changes, these improvements can help improve the public's health.
And I guess can also open up economic opportunities, which can also have an impact on health.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that economic attainment, income, poverty, all of these measures, no matter how you're looking at it, connects to health. And so if we can improve someone's access to a job that they couldn't get to because they don't have a car, they're transit dependent, just think about the impact that that can have on a family. Or think about the ability for a family to have access to telemedicine because it takes them 2 hours to get to a provider. But by getting broadband into a community, they're able to access healthcare, right? Just so many benefits for economic development, for an individual or family's economic growth and potential, in addition to community and neighborhood economic growth as well.
So I guess time will tell if it's implemented correctly. Yes.
Yeah, you have to keep an eye on implementation and look to see what's happening and to speak up and mobilize and organize when we see things that are creating more harm than the good that they're intended to do.
Definitely so. Well, I guess I'll have to have you back in a year or so on this particular topic to see if they follow through. Yes, to see if the Biden administration follows through with what they promised. Well, thank you, Keisha. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrea.
Public Health on Call is produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by Niall Owen McClusker, Matthew Martin, Spencer Greer, and Holly Cardinale, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media support from Grace Holz Fernandez. Thank you for listening.